Adedunmade Onibokun, who's joined us again once more.
Good morning, guys.
Yes.
Good morning, Lagos.
Adedunmade knows why I say that, because I feel abandoned, but it's okay. I will not bring my abandonment issues onto radio this morning. Instead, let's focus on how you can communicate with us via our different platforms.
Lagos, you can send us a message through WhatsApp. Our WhatsApp number is 0809-444-0981. You can also send it to us as a comment on YouTube. The YouTube address or link is youtube.com/smooth981fm Lagos. At Smooth981FM on Twitter, use the hashtag freshlypressed981.
Okay. Now, our first story is in from the Vanguard newspaper. Adedunmade, I'm with you on this one. 2019, and you know that's the topic on everyone's lips. The Senate have passed the electoral bill for the fourth time, according to reports. So, as expected, maximum expenses to be spent by a presidential candidate on the platform of registered political parties for the most exalted position in the land. Registered political parties for the most exalted position in the land. They are retaining it at 5 billion in this. But there are a lot more reforms, and I'd like you to take us through this.
Yeah, this is actually quite interesting because, first of all, a lot of attention has been trailing the Electoral Act. Probably because elections are next year, like we all know, and everybody just wants to be sure that INEC is on the right footing to carry out the process of elections. Now, this bill that has been passed is the fourth in number that has been amended by the National Assembly. And the major reason why assent was first denied by President Buhari in the first instance was because of the sequence of the elections. Now, since 1999, it has been the norm for presidential and National Assembly elections to be conducted on the same day, while the governorship and state houses of elections follow. However, House of Assembly, yes. Yeah. However, the lawmakers amended this sequence and they put the such that the National Assembly polls will be conducted first, followed by the state lawmakers and governors, while the presidential will be the last. So this was what the president kicked against initially, which was why the National Assembly had to pass the law again. Now, even after that, there were still issues bordering on drafting issues.
Yes.
According to what the president described.
Yes.
And that is what led to it being sent back to the Senate. I was aware when the Senate president read the letter from the president where he stated the reasons why he would not be signing the Electoral Act. Now, going to the provisions of the act itself, like you said, there's so many interesting things here. For instance, the issue of how much one can contribute to a political candidate.
Yes.
And also, I noticed that a lot of responsibility has been placed on INEC now, because you have a lot of what I'll call penalties placed on INEC officials who are not able to carry out their jobs very much. Now, there are other things that I would like Nigerians to look out for in this Electoral Act, which I believe is a plus as the 2019 elections is coming. The first of all is provisions of full biometric accreditation for voters, a directive that all presiding officers must collate voting data at the centers and transmit it electronically to the state centers from the polling station. And also, INEC is now mandated to have an e-list, or what I'll call an electronic list of all the voters, rather than the manual ones that we have and we have to go through every time we want to verify voters. Then also, there is another one that says that INEC now has the powers to do electronic voting. That is, people overseas can now vote in the Nigerian elections by virtue of this amendment, which is actually very good and very commendable in my opinion. Now, there are other ones which I also find quite interesting. For instance, in relation to political parties, where a candidate dies after commencement of an election, INEC now has 14 days, has a 14-day window to conduct a new election into that position. Then also, the bill empowers polling agents of all political parties to inspect originals of all electoral materials before commencement of elections. And also, if any agent gets to discover that either the party name is not there or the party logo is not there, INEC has to cancel that election and schedule another date in which that election is going to hold. Now, this electoral comes with a lot of reforms, like I said. Then the bill also prescribes a limit on nomination fees for parties, you know,
And
which is
what
actually
is
very
that
interesting because
limit?
we know what the APC charged recently. So it's 150,000 for ward and councillorship, 250,000 for area council chairman, 500,000 for House of Assembly, 1 million for House of Representatives, 10 million for the Senate, 5 million for governor, and 10 million for the president. Now, implementing all these reforms is going to be interesting. I want to see if it's going to kick off immediately in this 2019 or some are going to be left until 2023.
All right. Thank you very, very much for that, Adedunmade. I do suggest that everyone go read that, and we'll see if it will kick off ASAP. Up next, Devoe Okorie is in the building. Good morning, Devoe. Great to have you here.
Good morning. I could jump and pass.
All right. You mean small would have jumped and passed your story. But let's focus on this one. From the Premium Times, AMCON names Nigeria's non-paying debtors. Ubah, or Babalakin, Oloffa, Kashamu, and others are topping the list. Now, this is following the statement of the chief executive and managing director of AMCON, Ahmed Kuru, who had July promised to publish the names of delinquent debtors, and topping that list to a massive amount. Actually, we have Jimo Ibrahim listed with for Nikon Investments listed with 59 billion naira exposure. By Courtney Limited, owned by Wale Babalakin, with 40 billion. Joseph Dab and Sons Limited, owned by the Kutei family, 39 billion. And Tinapa Business Resort, of course, that's the Cross River State Government, 30 billion exposure. Now, I have a question here as to whether this name and shame has ever worked or will ever work in Nigeria, because these are huge amounts for people to owe. It's one thing to say you owe 1 million naira. By the time you start entering billions, I mean, do these debtors care? Your thoughts?
Do they care? Well, they do, because it does have its multiplier effect in the long run.
Okay.
Now, what we have here is the heavyweight champion list of those who
It
are
really
owing
is.
hefty amounts. And I think we need to understand the function of AMCON before we understand whether this name and shame does have any function.
Okay.
As you know, AMCON is responsible for especially managing national assets from a debt point of view. And what is important is, even though some of the monies were taken from banks or the government on its own, at the end of the day, it's being owed. And AMCON, if they have to now arrest the situation, will have to take federal government funds to cap the difference. Like, for example, you saw that in some of the old cases where they took over airlines, etc. That's our money. That's Commonwealth money. And if these people don't find a way to pay at the end of the day, we're on the loss. So they've tried their best for some time to try and come to some conclusions, but what they've stated, that Ahmed Kuru stated, that some of these companies have refused or haven't come to some amicable way of paying back, hence the need to publish them. Two, you'll also notice that the list is full of top businessmen, of some which are politicians. Those that are in jail, like Joseph Dare, own about 6.8, and some who are already, like, for example, I think Capital Oil, that's Ifeanyi Ubah at the top of the list at 115, was going for the gubernatorial position in his
Indeed.
in his state. So
And some are very notable repeat offenders. Former CEO of Intercontinental Bank, Erasmus Akingbola, is in there.
Nikon at 59, even the former power minister at
Yes, Bart Naji.
13 billion.
Yes.
With Joseph Dam, 39 billion by Courtney, who claims that he's not owing a bit, that it's the federal government that's owing him. Tinapa. It's good that the society understands that these are debtors, and sometimes it affects their work when they're trying to push for other things.
And very quickly, just before we move on from this story, speaking of the former Minister of Power, Bart Naji, and others as main promoters of Geometric Power, which owns 29 billion, I did speak to a couple of business people about this yesterday, because we did cover this on Business Express, and there's a concern there, especially when it comes to the power sector, because the power sector, both the DISCOs and GENCOs, have been complaining for a while about the need to review the tariffs. So in a way, is there any way that he could have stayed out of this sort of debt? Because, and we know that in that power sector, there is a lot of debt there, and it fundamentally stems from this issue of not being able to increase tariffs just yet. Your thoughts?
Yes, that's his own scenario.
Okay.
Everyone here
else
has their own scenario as to why
Okay.
they're in debt or not. Sometimes it's not meaning that they're bad people. It could be, like, for example, Babalakin has already refuted and said that in the projects that he carried out through by Courtney, that's the federal government that was supposed to pay about 100 and something billion, but they only paid,
189?
yes, they only paid a certain amount, which is why he's left in this balance, which you would have used to offset the debt. So There's a scenario for each and every place. AMCON is on top of it, and we hope that they can come to some amicable recourse.
Devoe, thank you very much for that. Up next from the Punch newspaper, the federal government to limit the number of children per mother. I know people already started sending in messages about this, and it's a very touchy and important topic because we have been talking about population growth, our explosion as a nation. We're close to 200 million in Nigeria, if our counting is right, and we're still not sure that we can count properly. But the story is that this has come out from the Minister of Finance during a session at the 24th Nigerian Economic Summit, which is still ongoing in Abuja, and a lot of interesting things have come out of there. So the federal policy have said that they are working on a policy, there isn't one yet, that would limit the number of children that a mother could have in Nigeria. They're engaging traditional rulers and other leaders, and specifically they found out that to be able to address one of the greatest challenges identified in the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan is the growth in population. They absolutely need to engage these institutions. Adedunmade, I would love your opinion on this.
Yeah, the first thing that came to my mind when I read about this, or when I even heard the headline while you're speaking this morning, was okay, why is it focused on women? Because from a legal point of view, that just seems to be what's that word again? It just seems to be.
Tread carefully here.
Yeah, I intend to. But anyway, what I'm trying to say
it has to be focused on women,
no,
because we are the conduit. We're the ones that bring life into the world.
Yes, but
that's the reality.
Yeah, it's discriminatory some sort.
No, it's not.
Some way. Well, let's just leave that debate for another day. But yeah, I agree that our population is a little bit unchecked.
A little.
Well, okay. Basic is unchecked.
Yes.
It's blowing up.
Right.
Okay.
And yes, it is blowing up. But I'm worried that one, we're starting too late. But hey, better late than never. However, I don't like the tone that they're setting, where they're saying that it is because of our population that our development is kind of staunched. And that is not what I actually agree with. I think that our population can be a plus. We're just going about using that human resource the wrong way. And so while we are focusing on building roads and infrastructure, we are not focusing on developing the people, because I believe that if we develop the people, then awesomely it's going to transcend into national development. This is what we need to focus on. Come on, Bill Gates said this the last time he was here.
True, but we
and
also have
nobody's
to
saying
know
anything.
that our rate of growth far outstrips our rate of development. That in itself is a fundamental issue. So no matter how much you're investing in your people, if the rate at which you're growing is outstripping everything else, I mean,
that's why I said I agree that yes, we are overblowing and we need to be checked. But also on the issue, how will this thing be policed? How will it be carried out?
so they're engaging traditional rulers and other leaders in the communities.
I think they should have some sort of monetary payment to it.
Let's wait for the policy.
Yes,
Let's
the
wait for the
couples,
policy.
yes.
I think the major challenge, of course, will be the religious sentiment to this as well, from some certain quarters of our country. We know this issue. We've been talking about it for so many years. How are they going to take it, and how would you pass on that message to those people?
One last line.
Okay.
A woman can have maybe 2 or 3 children, but a man can have as much as 50, as long as he's with different women.
Okay, he can't have it without the women. This is what you are
No.
misunderstanding.
Let's assume that he picks one woman and he gives her 2 babies.
Yes.
Then he can do that 10 times.
Again, it's
So
down
that
to the
doesn't
women.
really
Let's see.
solve the problem.
Nadia,
But let's move on though.
Yeah.
We will take these in just a second. Oh yeah,
So
Nadia.
Nadia, very quick. So
It has commenced their operation vandalism in the region. Devoe, your thoughts?
Well, basically, we've been seeing Army in its various operations and exercises, and we're hoping that they begin to contain these things properly, because it seems as if the ones that take place within the South seem to get more attention and
Yes.
efficiency than the ones that we hear up north.
All right.
Because even despite the fact that they've been up north, the issues of banditry have continued.
Very true. Thank you very much for that, Devoe. And we move on with more comments and stories.
New Telegraph newspaper. Pensioners demand 30,000 naira minimum request from the labor unions for an increase in the minimum wage. The pensioners are saying first that their pensions need to be increased commensurate with what the minimum wage stands at, and they're also reminding the federal government that the last review, according to the 1999 Constitution, sections 173, there was supposed to be a review every 5 years. The last one that was done was in 2010, July 2010. also went further to threaten the federal government that if they fail to pay the 12 months arrears of the 33% pension increase of 2010, it should they would within 21 days go ahead to picket their offices. I mean, take us through the story and the demands and
Well, this is probably one of the reasons why the federal government is still at loggerheads with the unions. They can't come to an agreement on how much they're prepared to pay for either 24,000 or 30,000. Of course, some people are lurking by the corners, like the pensioners as well, to waiting for that review to take place so that they can also strike as well and use that as a basis for their strike and protest as well too. So it's
but
very
their
interesting.
demands not legitimate. If the constitution says within 5 years do a review, it's a law, right? So it should be followed to the letter, don't you think?
Well, you are right. Absolutely. It should be followed. Everything, it's backed by the law that there should actually be an increase every 5 years. And the last time an increase occurred was in 2012. 2010. But the Constitution doesn't actually say that the minimum wage, the minimum pension paid should be the same as the minimum wage as well. So if you're talking of an increase, it's actually different to what level it should be as well. So he's actually asking for a 30,000 minimum pension that should be paid, which is, in my opinion, isn't actually correct. Pensions act anywhere in the world where you get paid the same amount as what you get paid when you're always far less than that.
But
it's a
does it
certain
make sense?
percentage.
Yeah, but does
the
it make
increase,
sense
yes.
that they're asking for an
Oh
increase?
yeah, it does make sense to get an increase. But whether to benchmark it at 30,000 naira, that's debatable, and I don't think you'll be getting too far with that, most especially considering the fact that we do not have the money.
Thank you, Gbolahan, for that one. We'll move on very quickly to the next story from Punch newspaper. Representatives approved Buhari's $2.7 billion loan request and $82.54 million to refinance Eurobond. House of Representatives yesterday made this approval for the president or the presidency to raise this sum from the international capital market. They gave the approval at the city in Abuja that was presided over by Mr. Yakubu Dogara, who's the Speaker of the House, and gave the president the nod to refinance the balance of $500 million matured Eurobonds in the international capital market. Devoe?
Well, this has to do with the funding of the budget. Remember, for a long while, we were debating about what the budget was, but the real issue was whether they would actually have the funds to deliver on the mandate, as the last budget of 2017 was only fulfilled to that of about 40% there-ish. Now, this 2.7 billion from the international capital markets, most times Nigeria hasn't had issues in raising money due to our high cost of funds. So hopefully we intend to see investors lock that up very quickly. They also gave them a nod on the $500 million Eurobond maturity, which was in tandem with what they had proposed for the 9.2 trillion Appropriation Act. Now, this story is also covered the House Committee on Capital Markets and Institutions that gave an ultimatum to about 9 companies, 48 hours to produce their documents and compliance level with the regulatory requirements to operate in the country. That was from Capital Oil, Orlando, Supply, MRS, Total Forte, Japool, Turner. And basically, they mentioned that if they wouldn't heed to this call, first of all, the chief executives were meant to appear, and that for some time they had disregarded their request to submit their compliance level to this committee. Now, they've also asked those that are publicly quoted on the Nigerian Stock Exchange that they be delisted if they fail to comply. These are the functions of the National Assembly. And my grouse is that we expect to see the National Assembly working this assiduously in every sector of the economy. Sometimes there seems to be a strong hand when it has to do with sectors that seem to be well-heeled, like the banking and the oil and gas sector. You seem to show much power there. But in other sectors,
that's where the money is.
Yes, other sectors we don't seem to see when you flex the big muscle, because there should be law and order in our operations as a country. Hopefully, they will begin the marketing of this 2.7 billion raising, and we will see how far. And in the long run, remember, this government has tried their best to raise funds to refinance debts. So what it means in 2-3 years, they've extended that to like a 5-6 years to burden on the federal government.
Thank you very much, Devoe. Sticking with Punch for this next story, federal government to carve 5 firms out of NIPOST. The federal government made this announcement through the Minister of Communications, Mr. Devoe Okorie. He said that in an exclusive interview that the move was part of efforts to reform the postal service and put it on the path of profitability. Says some of the companies that are going to unbundle or roll out from NIPOST. The exercise being supervised by Bureau of Public Enterprises will be in the banking sector, insurance sector, and some others. I mean, take us through this story, Adedunmade.
Well, this journey started in 2016, actually, when the senator representing my constituency, Senator Gbolahan Adenuga, passed a motion for the reform of the
NIPOST.
Yeah, the act. And what is quite interesting is that what this seeks to do is to, because the NIPOST itself has acted as a regulator and a player in the industry for so long. And the act itself was passed in 1992, which is about a little over 20 odd years now. So what it seeks to do now is to remove NIPOST's role as a regulator and separate it from being a player. So it's going to focus more now on being a regulator than being a player. So now there's going to be the commission who is going to be in charge of courier companies in Nigeria, basically. So these companies are going to have to be registered by the new NIPOST commission. And if you're not registered under that commission, then you cannot continue business. So that is one very important point for any courier company out there. Now, also, with regard to the 5 companies that will now be created, they include the NIPOST Banking and Insurance Company, NIPOST Property and Development Company, NIPOST Transport and Logistics Services Company, NIPOST E-Government Services Company, and NIPOST E-Commerce Services Company. Now, there's a lot of interesting things going on with regard to NIPOST. I remember that several months ago, the Stamp Duties Act was passed, and it affected NIPOST some sort, in which it provided that payments made in banks are also now subject to stamp duty. So NIPOST gets to earn some cash from the banks as well. And now there are also some other things that it seeks to do, which I also find quite interesting, which like I said earlier, it seeks to remove the regulatory powers whatsoever from NIPOST. And most particularly, it allows NIPOST to focus more on reforms and value creation to the businesses that he has now. It allows NIPOST to pursue what I would call effective revenue generation, which is actually most important for the company. Now, these 5 companies are going to create jobs, which is actually very interesting for Nigerians. Yes. But I look forward to see the implementation. I hope it's going to be smooth running. I hope there are not going to be hiccups. I hope everything is just going to be perfect and Nigerians can say, yeah, great job.
Optimism. Thank you very much. Guardian is next. Guardian newspaper has this story. Federal government opens North Central region for fibre investors. They said the investors are expected to deploy metropolitan fibre infrastructure within their assigned territory on an open access, non-discriminatory, price-regulated basis. Gbolahan, what are your thoughts on this?
It's an excellent move. This is under the Nigerian Communications Commission. When we're talking about the fiber networks, we're talking about broadband connectivity across Nigeria. So, and currently as we speak, our target for the year end was meant to be 30% broadband connectivity, but unfortunately we are currently at 22%, and it's actually been said that we're not going to be able to achieve that 30% connectivity come the year of the end. And the funny thing that I read from this article by the chairman of the NCC, who is Professor Umar Dambata, the blame is actually going on other agencies for not actually working as speedily as his agency has been working. Yeah, that's what he said. But when we look at the situation, of course, we're looking at broadband connectivity. I'll give you an example. Egypt has about 50% broadband connectivity. Kenya has about 85%. Ghana has 34%. So we still have a long way to go in terms of the connectivity in Nigeria. Let's hope by the time the bidders will bid, they'll be able to meet NCC's requirement and then go ahead.
To some other two robbers in the outskirts of the banks actually waiting for customers to come in.
Well, it just says a lot about the security around our banks in Nigeria. Of course, quite a lot of times we've heard of situations where people have gone to withdraw money from the banks and they've been ambushed by these perpetrators around the corner. So what sort of security measures are the banks putting in place to ensure that we avoid situations as this in the future? It's a good move by the bank anyway. They've been able to use technology to forestall this incident. So, kudos to them.
We find CCTV cameras everywhere, but it just speaks to the...
well, it's sometimes not even being manned. The cameras are just there, but it's not being used.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And that's how we've come to the end of today's show. I'm going to read out a couple of messages just so we get a few of them in. Bolariwa Durojaye up on Twitter says, employed, productive people tend to procreate less. It's that simple. Olukonko Samuel talking about Python dance says, priority. What does it really mean? When the army will do 3 installations of Python dance in the southeast and Crocodile Smile in the south-south, while people are being killed by herdsmen in the north, that's not priority. How hard is that? While up on WhatsApp, lots of messages are still in. Shola says, okay, no, I don't know what that means. And we've got this one in from Martins, who says, the problem of Nigeria is implementing and enforcement. How do you want to stop a man or woman from having not more than 2 children when we don't know how many we are? When we don't know how many hospitals and maternity hospitals we have? How do you want to stop home deliveries? So you see, the problem is not making the law or the policy, but the implementation and enforcement. And a big thank you to everyone. Please join our analysts up online. You've got at Mr. G Quest, you have at Adedunmade, and you've got at Devoe Okorie. Coming up next at 8:15, we will be talking sports inside the locker room, so keep listening to Smooth Breakfast.
Thank you. Nice one, guys. That was quite